songwriter of all times, isn't he? And it's incredible, you know, and it's a psalm about God knowing you. You know, David's written it from his own perspective about God knowing me, but it's a psalm about, you know, we can all read it and make it our own, can't we? It's a psalm about God knowing you. And I just can you imagine the sense of intimacy that David must have had, must have been in that place with God when he was just exposing all this way of God knowing him. And he penned it all down there. He wrote it down there for us. And it's incredible. And that picture up there on the screen, incidentally, if you're just joining us on YouTube, read Psalm 139. Read the first 18 verses. You know, stop the thing from playing right now and just spend a moment. Read the first 18 verses. That's what we've just done. Join our time of worship, and then you'll be up to speed with us. Okay. So yeah, that picture I've put on the screen there, it's actually of a library somewhere, and it's got, if you just think about it, you've got all the students are there and they're studying. Think of the knowledge that they would have in their heads. Think of the knowledge that they're learning. Think of the knowledge that they would have by their experience. And they're surrounded by some bookcases, and they're all full of books. Think of the knowledge that's contained within those books. And then I really like the way that an artist has, on the ceiling, painted those pictures of the heavens, you know, as this vastness. You know, really quite imagine, you know, it's portraying a vast amount of knowledge. But even that is insufficient to explain and portray the knowledge of God, which is incredible, isn't it? It's incredible. And God knows you. God knows you through and through. He knows your ways. He knows your words. He knows your thoughts. And you can't get away from God. As David wrote, even when I go into the dark place, you're still there. Even when it's dark, it's as if it's light for you. God knows you through and through. And he acknowledges, doesn't he, as he writes that psalm, he acknowledges God's work in him as he was formed in his mother's womb. And all the days of his life, God knows. God knew before they happened. It's the same for you. God knows you through and through. And I wanted that to be the context, the background for what we're going to look at this morning. That God knows us through and through. So what I feel God wants us to look at this morning is actually quite a simple word. It's very straightforward, but it's a simple principle. But I think it's deeply profound in the sense that if we can actually engage with it and apply it, then it will have huge ramifications for us as individuals, can have huge ramifications for us as a church. Now, last week, the other week, whenever it was, Chris was talking, and he was talking about the way ahead for us as a church. As part of that, he mentioned this sort of thread, if you like, of prayer and presence and listening. Now, all of these things are so interlinked, and they sort of like overlap each other. They're really interdependent on each other. It's actually quite hard to isolate one from the other because they are so interlinked, they're so overlapping each other, and they're so important. And it's not hard to see, is it, or hard to discern that if there's any sort of obstacle in our relationship with God, then all of those things are going to be a little bit harder. You know, my wife has this wonderful gift of when I go to the bathroom, she'll start talking to me. and like I can be cleaning my teeth or something, and she's talking to me, and I can't hear her properly because her tap's running and that, and I can't talk to her because I've got, you know, toothbrush in my mouth. You can see how that makes that whole process so much more difficult. So if I stop cleaning my teeth, I come out of my bathroom, that communication, that being, that presence, I can hear her, we can talk, is so much less frustrated, isn't it? So that's, last week Richard challenged us a little bit, didn't he, about how well are we listening to God. So just wanted us to pick up a couple of things there. I mean, one of the verses that he used there was, "Be still and know that I am God." And it's almost a well-known phrase, isn't it? And, people know what it means to be still. They have or an idea of what that means. And we all sometimes recognise that we need to do that sometimes because we're busy or lots of other things are going on. But that phrase goes on, it says, "And know that I am God." A more accurate sort of, or a simpler way to look at it is just shut up and know that God exists. Just know that everything about God is true. So that means putting aside some of your questions maybe, some of your whys, some of your what-ifs, some of your anger, some of your fears, some of your frustrations, some of your aspirations, all manner of things, some of your hurts, your concerns, your worries, and know that he is God. When we just put your mind back to that psalm I read out, the vastness of God's knowledge. So really, when we say be still and know that I am God, you're actually giving consent to him being the Almighty and no other. Let all the other voices fade away. So we're actually giving consent. He is who he says he is. Maybe some of my questions are phrased wrong when I'm saying, why? Maybe it should be, I don't understand, but I consent that you are God. You are who you say you are. You are sovereign. And another phrase, the verse that Richard put up was, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." That was a verse that's taken from the Transfiguration, where Jesus is transfigured before the disciples. And there's a voice comes out of heaven, the voice of God. It says, "This is my Son, my beloved Son. With him I'm well pleased. Listen to him." I don't know whether you remember, but however, was it 3-ish years ago, 4, I don't know, when we went into lockdown, I can remember the first Sunday that we had, and I recorded a message that we had to send out, and that message was on that very theme. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. We were about to go into a time of lockdown that, we didn't actually know what was going to happen, did we? We didn't know what to expect. It was new to all of us. And God was saying to us, listen to my Son. So that means you don't listen to the other voices, okay? You give attention to what Jesus is saying. And I felt last week, God is saying that to us again. It's another significant moment, is listen to my Son. It's so easy to listen to other voices or other concerns, other issues. I think that's a word for our church now. It's a word for us. It's a significant time for us, I believe. And he says, listen to my Son. Listen to Jesus. So I wanted to, this morning I felt that we should look at something that Jesus has said. And you'll be aware, many of you, I'm sure, of the Sermon on the Mount. You can open your Bibles at Matthew chapter 7-ish. Starts in chapter 5 and goes through to chapter 7. That's the Sermon on the Mount. And it's a well-known bit of teaching. And I wanted to look particularly where, towards the end of that, in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus begins to conclude that teaching. And if you cast your eye down that chapter, if you've got it open in front of you, it sort of summarizes everything. He's been teaching and talking to the crowds and the disciples. And he says, you have a choice, really. You've got one of two ways you can receive this, one of two ways that you can go. And then he uses some culturally relevant illustrations to convey that principle. So he starts off in, I think it's around about verse 13-ish. He talks about two roads or two gateways. You know, so one's easy and one's hard. So he's talking about what is your vision, you know. And then he talks about two kinds of prophets. Some bear good fruit and some bear bad fruit. What are you listening to? And then he talks about two kinds of disciples, okay? Those that vocally claim to be followers of Jesus. And there will come a day when he says, I never knew you. And by implication, he's saying that their heart isn't right. But there'll be those whose hearts have been surrendered to Christ, and he'll welcome them. And so that I just sort of put that slide up really as an illustration of a principle that he's putting across there. So he's saying that there's God's way or there's another way. God's way, it might appear difficult at times, and it might appear unattractive. But go the duration, go the distance, and it opens out into something that is life-saving, life-transforming. Or the other way, where you can actually resist perhaps what God is saying to you. It might appear popular, it might even appear attractive, it might even appear easy, but it narrows down, and ultimately it's life-destroying. That's the principle. Okay, it's as simple, isn't it? It's a simple principle, but sometimes it's a very hard thing to apply. And then in Matthew chapter 7, he actually concludes that bit of teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. And he talks about two foundations, or two builders. And that's a little bit, particularly one I felt we should look at this morning. And it says, it's entitled, Build Your House on the Rock. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine, does not do them, will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, floods came, winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Okay. I think it's quite a simple illustration. You know, I guess you've heard it before. It's a very sort of, it's easy to bypass it, you know, because it seems that simple. But to actually apply it is actually quite hard. So I just wanted just to pause on it and consider it a little bit more. There's a few key words in there, and when you look at the original meaning of some of the Greek words, it actually helps us to engage with it a little bit deeper. I've picked out the word hears, so it's everyone who hears these words of mine. When you look at what the original word means, it hears means to give consideration to. Okay, so you have to perceive the meaning, and in doing that you gain understanding, and you begin to learn from that understanding. And so from listening you begin to take action. In other words, you give attention to it and you take action. You don't skate over it, you actually take it in, and it changes your approach. And then when it talks about, it mentions the word house. Okay, we all know what a house is, but it actually means a dwelling place. When you say a dwelling place, it's actually, you can sort of try and broaden the image of that in your mind as to the way that we live, the principle that we exist, the principle that we base our lives upon. That's what it means when it says your house, your dwelling place. And also not to think of it so much as an individual building, And this would have been particularly relevant, I guess, for rich people at that time, but to think of a whole estate. You know, we live near Shugborough, and it's often referred to as Shugborough Estate, and in actual fact there's quite a few cottages and buildings around, even outside of the immediate bit of Shugborough Park, that are actually owned by Shugborough Estate. And what I'm trying to convey is that this is something bigger than perhaps you realise. And when it covers an estate, it covers the whole operation and function of that dwelling. And so that would include the whole family. It would include the servants and the people that work there. Okay? So by implication, this is actually a bigger thing than just my solitary house. And then the word rock. The actual original word means a mass of rock rather than a boulder or a stone, you know, that could easily be moved. It's a sure, solid, immovable foundation. And in there's a very similar account to this in Luke's Gospel. And there it talks about the wise man building his house on a rock, but he says he had to dig down. He had to dig down to the sure foundation. So often what is on the surface is not the bedrock. So it takes some effort, doesn't it, to dig down to then start building from the bedrock. And of course the sand. Sand is an insecure foundation. It's unstable. It has no secure substance. It's interesting to note that for those of you that know the Bible, in Revelation, where it talks about a beast coming out of the sea, the beast that ultimately gets destroyed is standing on the sand on the shoreline. Okay? So ultimately, the sand is not something to base your dwelling upon, to base your foundation upon. And I think it's quite, it helps you to think a little bit deeper, doesn't it, when you understand some of the words. But again, it's quite a simple sort of illustration. And you can just consider, and reflect a little bit on the differences of the two builders. You've got, what describes as the foolish builder. So he's built his house on the sand. And, it suggests to me that that's an easy build, okay? It's quick and it's easy. Unlike the wise man, he hasn't had to dig down and put in foundations. The wise man has taken some time and exercised a bit of diligence, really, there, hasn't he? And he's made a greater investment in what he's going to base his dwelling upon, what he's going to base his life upon. I know some friends of mine that had an extension built, and I think I'm right in saying that there was a wall that an existing wall that the builders were going to use, and when they got to it, they discovered that the foundations of that particular wall weren't sufficient, so they had to take it down, dig down, put in new foundations, and put up a new wall. And they ended up with a good extension in the end, but that would have cost them, That would have cost them more. It would have taken more time. It was an investment. And I don't know how to convey this, because I feel so strongly about this, but think, what are you investing in? How much effort are you putting in to your walk with God? I really want to convey that. If you get to next Sunday and reflect back and think, how have I invested this week in my relationship with God? And you can't come up with anything. I want to cry for you, really, because I want to say, come on, God's calling you. Just give him the attention that he deserves. It'll be different for each one of us, but give him the attention that he deserves. Invest in a life with a sure foundation. The foolish man builds something that isn't secure and is ultimately destroyed. But the wise man builds something that is stable and permanent. He's thought ahead. And I'd say he's building God's way. the foolish man hasn't really thought ahead. And he's building the wrong way, quite simply. Simple, isn't it? But hard to apply. Concludes that little passage there. Talks about the authority of Jesus speaking. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. Comes up with this choice, you see. Do I want to go with Jesus, the authority of Jesus, or that of the scribes? The scribes and the rabbis were he said rabbits. The scribes and the rabbis were considered as authoritative expanders of the law. And all authority was placed on the law and nothing else. But Jesus came and he didn't do that. He spoke with a divine authority that had been given him by God. And this amazed people. It says they were astonished by it. It also created some hostility towards him because some people would not accept that. So he ended up with two groups of people. One group were unprepared to accept his authority and abandon their ways of doing things. And ultimately that would lead to eternal separation from God. And then there were those that were prepared to surrender their ways to Christ and totally align themselves with what he was saying. And that would be life-giving. The principle is just so simple, isn't it? So simple. The building of a house, if the foundations are incorrect, it's going to be insecure and unstable. In other words, part of our ways, part of our principles are ungodly. That's going to frustrate what God wants to do with us and in us. Every part of our lives needs to be built on godly ways, something that is secure and permanent. You think, well, how does this affect me? It's so easy to think that this affects everybody else, or you look at other people and you look at the way they're building. You know, maybe just people within the church, but maybe it might be people in your family, people you work with, people you mix with. So easy to look at other people. And I really feel God is saying, this is my son, listen to him. He wants you to listen to what he's saying. Because I think it's going to have huge ramifications for us as individuals and as a church. Remember that psalm that we looked at the beginning, Psalm 139? We talked about God's knowledge being so vast and how he knew the intimate detail of each one of us. He knows the intimate detail of each one of us. And it's just awesome, isn't it? You know, as I said, David is arguably the best worship songwriter ever. And it talks about the supreme knowledge and understanding of God. But that psalm hasn't finished, and I just wanted to go back to it. Because from verse 19, listen to this, in continuation of that psalm. We've just been learning about a God that knows everything and how incredible he is. And then David writes this. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Well, that's a change of tone, isn't it? That's a real change of tone from what the earlier part of the psalm's about. You think, what's that doing there? It sort of grates, doesn't it? I think, well, maybe maybe this is part of another song he's writing and he's got himself muddled up. You know, this is one of your big hits, David, and you've really messed it up now. Just doesn't seem to fit. But I think what's happening here is that David is in such this place of intimacy with God. He's in step with God's Spirit. And as he's in that place and he's writing all those wonderful things that precede that, the Spirit reveals something to him that is ungodly. Okay? And he's written it in a general term to start with. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. He's spotted something. He's seen something that is ungodly. He doesn't want that. I would suggest that God's revealed something to him about himself, about his own nature, about his own character, about his own dwelling, about his own foundation. He's revealed something to him, and he realizes it's ungodly. It's that bad, he doesn't want it. He wants rid of it. He's examined himself, and he wants rid of that. That's a good place to be. You see, the good news about this psalm is that God knows you through and through. The bad news is that we try to hide the bad bits. This is a bit like Adam and Eve. You know, when they initially sinned, they actually hid from God. But here we have David, and he's recognizing something, and he's calling out to God, will you help me? Will you get rid of this that's in me? I want to surrender this to you. And he concludes that psalm. I put these verses up. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Do you begin to get it? If my foundations are wonky, if my principles, if my dwelling that is expanse, is a greater expanse than just me, it has implications to my friends, my family, it's implications to the church. If there's something wrong, it needs to be dealt with. Sometimes I think if God really knew what I was thinking, he wouldn't want me. But he does know what I'm thinking, and he does want me. And that's the same for you. Are we wise builders, or are we foolish builders? And really I want to encourage you to give him permission to highlight ungodly foundations in order that they can be put right, in order that the builders, in a sense, can dig down and put in something that's secure and permanent and lasting and godly. And sometimes I really think this is relevant to all of us. You can talk about this sort of thing, to churches in general. And church leaders are great at this because they think it's everybody else, but it applies to each one of us. Get rid of this nonsense that, I'm the backbone of this establishment. I'm not going to go forward for ministry. I'm not going to go forward for prayer. I'm not going to go forward and appear to be needy. No, we all need God. We all need God's sovereign work in our lives. This is for all of us. So I just offer it to you, really, to come before God and ask him to search you. Ask him to search you. He knows your heart. Ask him to reveal things that are a bit wonky in the foundation area in order that they can be put right. I really think that, if we can deal with these things, then hearing God, praying with God, and knowing God's presence will be so less frustrating, so less cluttered, so much easier. There's only good can come from it and through it. So I encourage you, each of you. I don't know whether Tina, whether we can sing another song or something, or whether we can just. I feel like we just need to just ponder on that for a moment. So perhaps we can just stand, and I'm going to pray, and